You just closed on your first rental property. Congratulations. Passive income. It's all easy, smooth sailing from here. Hold on a second. Let me give you a dose of reality. Today, we're going to talk about tenants. But before I start talking about tenants, I want to give you just a little bit of a nugget that took me a little bit to understand. See, when I got my first property, it was an accident. I joined the military, I had my house, and I rented it out, and I had a great tenant. And then I bought my second house. Looking back, having one tenant with a mortgage is pretty risky, especially as a young enlisted person, because you're on the hook for that mortgage if the tenant's late. Fortunately, I had a good tenant. But think about that. You have your W 2 job as backup. So, your first property you buy, you're not going to be able to retire or quit your job off just one property. Your rents are going to cover the mortgage and you're going to put a little money back. The time you get the second house, okay, now that one tenant misses out, maybe I have enough or a little bit of a supplement between the other one to kind of cover some of that other payment. But I'm still missing out on the big repairs like roofs or main sewer lines and things like that. And to be honest with you, I really didn't feel financially comfortable until I was about 6 units in. In fact, I was kind of still supplementing probably up to 10 units. And then I learned the power of getting one of them paid off. And we'll talk about that a little later about what that ratio should look like. But today, back to tenants. Imagine you're sitting at home, about to hop in the bed, about you just got out of your shower, you're done with the day, the phone call. It's your tenant. They need something. They got a water leak, something that can't wait. Or maybe you're out on a dinner date with your significant other. Or maybe you've taken a vacation with your family. It never fails when something goes wrong. It's at the most inconvenient time. I'm going to start with some general things that tenants do or say, issues tenants have, or things that get into situations that you need to look out for. And then we're going to end on common excuses for late payments. I should caveat this isn't all tenants. This is some tenants. I have a really great tenants, what I have now. I wouldn't trade them for the world. Some of them have been with us for a really long time. Thank you if you're watching and you're one of them. Let's start with messes that they leave behind. It's not uncommon for them to leave behind old tires, furniture, big CRT TVs that they can't dispose of that cost you money to get rid of. That's why you have a deposit. Now, at least where I rent, it's very common for tenants to try to negotiate that last month of rent by using their deposit. So you got to be very firm in saying, that's not what that's for. It's for damages. I know that there's some really slummy landlords out there that don't like to give deposits back. Personally, we love to give deposits back because that means everything is clean and I can turn around and rent it out tomorrow to somebody else. But tenants leave giant messes behind. You can look back at some of the videos of the houses that I bought. I've actually had houses left in that condition. So think about that. If I was a young enlisted person making very little money and my tenant moved out owing me money and left me $5,000 worth of repairs, I probably would have never been where I am today. So I was very fortunate, and I've been very fortunate with the tenants that I have and have had over time. And I'm going to give you some red flags today. One of the first red flags that I kind of pick up on is when the tenant kind of talks down to you. They give you pretty weird excuses and they almost think you're like stupid. It's like the first time you hear this. And I'm telling you, I've heard many excuses throughout my life managing properties. But tenants will tell you the dumbest stuff sometimes. One of the most common things that they'll tell you is, oh, that hole in the wall was there when I moved in. This is why it's important for you to video your rooms, take pictures, and if you have a move in, move out checklist, I highly recommend you do it because they sign off on it. And then when you go to give their deposit back and there's a hole in the wall, you can say, hey, look, you signed off and said that this room was perfect. Another big one are pets without permission. They don't have any pets when they move in. They don't want any pets. Oh, we can't have them. Next thing you know, they're like a certified dog breeder and they got like kennels and everything on the property. You got to be firm with pets. You got to have a pet deposit. You got to stand by it. You got to make sure it's a dog that your insurance can have. I know you're going to get into, oh, some dogs are protected. You're right. Service animals are protected. Depending on the laws in your area, check them out. Service dogs are protected, but in some states, emotional support animals are protected as well. So you have to know the laws where you are. And I'm telling you, tenants will take advantage of this and they will try to pass off emotional support or service animals. Ask for the documentation. Another one we get all the time is, hey, I moved my boyfriend or girlfriend in or my friend and I need them out because we're no longer getting along. And they want me to evict them. They want me to pay the money to evict them. No chance. I tell them straight up, look, if I'm going to evict somebody, I'm evicting everybody. If you want to evict them, I can help you through the process. Some other things that we've seen, obviously we live in Illinois. It gets cold here in the winter. They'll drip their sinks so their pipes don't freeze. And next thing you know, the sink's overflowing because they forgot to take the plug out of the sink. So it overflows, flows into the room, ruins the ceiling down below. And another one, We have baseboard heaters or radiant heat sometimes. Sometimes they stack things against them that shouldn't be stacked against it. Lightweight material, paper type stuff that could catch fire easily. I've even had 2 people die in properties that we own. One of the things I really hate dealing with is domestic violence situations. You can letter a no trespass the person, you can get help the tenant get orders of protection, but sometimes things happen and they end up back together. Some more things that I see that are kind of comical are, hey, my furnace isn't working, I don't know what's going on. One of the first questions we ask are, have you changed the batteries in your thermostat? Very common. But most importantly, have you changed your furnace filter? And they're like, no, I don't use my furnace in the summer. You need to change your furnace filters every month. It's in the lease. My favorite part about that is when they swear up and down they've changed the batteries and the furnace filter, and then we end up calling a service technician out there, and the filter is so clogged, or the batteries are corroded. Again, it's Illinois, and I know things get cold here and pipes do freeze, but there's one house that I'm thinking of, one situation specifically, where they put like a blanket between the front room and the kitchen because they wanted to keep the front room warmer. The pipes are in the kitchen. Guess what? They froze. Then they complained. We go out there and it's like, hey, remove this blanket. And then the room heated back up and the pipes unfroze. Multi-family units. And what I'm talking about here is I have a couple old homes that have been converted into properties, or even some duplexes that share a wall. Jeez, let me tell you, I know people tell you how much money you can make off these places, but you need to do some due diligence on these. You really need to make sure all the tenants get along. Because let me tell you something, I have a fourplex where it never fails. I end up playing the babysitter somewhere along the line. If they don't get along, every time the upstairs neighbor walks, they're going to walk too loud. Every time the downstairs neighbor, TV is going to be up too loud. If you have people who don't get along, they're going to find ways to complain about each other. If you don't like your neighbor and now you're on top of your neighbor, every time something happens, you're going to complain about it. Don't get me wrong, there's definitely situations where you should complain to your landlord or property manager about it. But man, sometimes it just feels like you're a babysitter in situations like that. Again, fortunately now, I have really good tenants in that space. I don't have to worry about it. And when tenants leave, you'll be amazed at some of the stuff they leave behind. I talked about some of the trash earlier. I've had a couple times where tenants stopped paying for trash service, and I had a garage full of trash. I had one house where the tenant filled their basement full of trash sacks. Think about that. Down in the basement, layered. It was terrible. The house stunk so bad. I have no idea how he lived there so long. It's not uncommon for tenants to take every light bulb in the house. I don't understand it myself. It's not uncommon for tenants to take down smoke detectors because they beep. Fortunately, now they're all 10-year batteries. But back when it was the 9 volts, it was not uncommon for them to, take them down. I had a house that I bought that was fully gutted, that the people who had lived there before got evicted out. And when they left, they put a steel ball in the floor drain in the basement. So every time there was any water in the basement, it never got out because that drain was clogged. The only way we found it is we put a snake down there with a camera, and we couldn't get to the street. So then we come in from the street and the ball popped out, and then everything worked. It was crazy. I've had squatters. COVID was ridiculous for that. I've had squatters where you evict one and they had like somebody else come in after that. It was actually so bad that they kept doing this to me that I was thinking about talking to a friend to see if I could pay them to go live in the house. How much would it cost for me to move you in? Because again, all I would have to do is assign the lease and them to receive mail there. Talk to a lawyer. That's not legal advice. Just sometimes you got to be creative on what you're trying to do. It was not a good situation, but fortunately those days are behind us. Some more of my favorites. The dishwasher doesn't work, and then you get somebody out there and you realize the dishwasher has a filter and it's clogged because every time they do their dishes, they just put their dishes straight in. They never rinse pieces of corn and meat. They just barely scraped it off, if they scraped it off at all, and then they put it in the dishwasher. It clogs up, of course. Some of the newer dishwashers have garbage disposals in them, but these did not. Speaking of that, I have no doubt people pour everything down the sink because I've seen it. We have a tenant that I evicted that I actually got a judgment against for almost the full value of the house because he destroyed it that much. I mean, it was like he let his kids, he had 5 of them, run through the house with baseball bats. All the windows were knocked out. There were holes in the wall, coloring all over the walls. They even left the toilet, and this happens, unfortunately, this is not the only time this happened. The toilet was completely full, if you know what I mean, to the top. Yeah, that one's pretty extreme, but the one that I think I hate more than any of them is raccoons and squirrels. And you're probably like, what? Listen, squirrels will eat through the side of the house to get inside. Raccoons seem to find ways in all the time. It feels like every year I have to deal with a raccoon or a squirrel getting into somebody's attic. Fortunately, I have a couple tricks to get some of that stuff out, thanks to some people who I know that are animal control. I appreciate you if you're watching this. But yeah, raccoons and squirrels suck. I've had raccoons fall through ceilings before. And you're probably wondering, how's that possible? I'll get to it, but let's talk about rent excuses. I'm going to give you some common rent excuses that I hear. And again, my tenants that I have now are awesome tenants. I'm talking about tenants that I've had in the past. The most common one I think is, I just started a new job, or hey, we had unexpected bills, or I had to take somebody to the hospital, or I had to take somebody here, or I didn't get paid this week. The power bill was too high. Don't get me wrong, power bills are extremely high. I get all that. But if your house is set on 80 degrees in the winter or 60 degrees in the summer, you're lucky. I can't afford those bills. But it's not uncommon for me to get those complaints and then go check with the power company or the water company to realize that that person hadn't paid that bill for 2 or 3 months. So when they tell me they have a $900 bill, yeah, you probably do because you haven't paid in 3 or 4 months. And speaking of power bills, some of my favorite complaints are, hey, the AC or furnace isn't keeping up. Well, yeah, you have it set on 80 or 60. It's probably not going to keep up. We've had people ask, will you lower my rent because I'm pregnant? If they're behind on rent, more than likely, they're not going to tell you what needs to be fixed. Remember that raccoon story falling through the ceiling? Yeah, they had a leak in their ceiling. They had a raccoon in the attic. They didn't say anything because they were behind on rent. The next thing I know, I get a call, a raccoon's in the kitchen. But as soon as you increase the rent, they're going to tell you everything that's wrong with the house. They're going to pick it apart like it's $1 million condo. And I have a strategy for that I'll release in another video later down the road. Let's talk about evictions for just a second. Remember, I told you that I had somebody who had a judgment almost for the full amount of the house appraisal because of the damage they left it in. Fortunately, I think between me and my parents, we probably have less than 6 or 8 evictions. We've been pretty lucky. We have some really good strategies and some really good ways to vet our tenants. But occasionally it happens. We understand things happen to everybody. When we get to a place where we're talking about evictions, that means we're talking they've missed a couple months of rent and they failed to meet their promise to pay. There's a concept called cash for keys, which basically means if you are behind on rent or you're a bad tenant and I want you out, I might give you some money for you to give me the keys to the property. I don't think that that's smart. I personally am not a fan of that. I understand why people do it because evictions do cost a lot of money. I have a good lawyer that basically flat rate stuff. So I'm good. A good lawyer is somebody you need in your network to review your documents, your leases, your addendums, your eviction stuff. You need a good lawyer in your network. Find one now. I personally refuse to do cash for keys when tenants are behind. I got an eviction. I got the judgment. What do I do with it next? Now I got to take them back to court. They got to do a discovery on the person to see what their assets are, to see what their wages are, and then you could potentially get their wages garnished. This one in particular, the person didn't have a job for a while, was bouncing around job to job, and then finally got a state job. When he got his state job, we did the discovery, they garnished his wages. Less than a year after that, he quit his state job, and I was back to square one. And every time I have to go figure out where he is or get that discovery, it costs me money. So you got to figure out, is the juice worth the squeeze? Is it worth going back to court, small claims court, pulling that lawyer in, that cost? Hiring a private eye if you got to chase the person down. That's why it's super important to vet your tenants properly up front. Maybe in another video, I'll show you how we vet as well. But if you haven't yet, please hit that bell, like and subscribe, comment down below. If you're a property manager or a landlord, I would love to hear some of the stories you have. Comment down below so we can share. Stick around. We're going to do great things.